Hey guys, and welcome back to the pod. Today, I am doing another Q&A episode. So, for the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to be answering questions sent in by you guys, the listeners, and I'll be doing my best to answer them to the best that I can. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you see a little orb in front of me, that kind of represents where the questions are coming from. I sort of call it this sort of internet intellectual question orb, I guess you could call it. I don't know. But for those listening on Spotify, grab a snack, go for a walk, whatever it is you're doing, and let's get right into it.
Hey Kinzer, loving all your stuff. I just wanted to ask a question about judgment, and how can I sort of limit my judgment of other people as well as myself?
This is a good question, and I actually think the two go hand in hand because I think as we learn to stop judging ourselves, we in turn stop judging other people. Because, when we think about it and we zoom out, there's not really a reason to judge other people. They may be doing something strange, but you'll notice that even when you come to that judgment, what are you judging them for? Because they're dressed differently than you, because they're acting differently than you, because they're speaking differently than you. Why do we care? I guess is the big question. And the reason we care is because oftentimes, and it's many of the time, it's actually an unconscious kind of triggering reaction that happens within us that we don't realize until after. But we see someone sort of doing something that would be out of our comfort zone a lot of times, or we see someone doing something totally different than what we would perceive ourselves to be capable of doing and what we would just choose to do. So we come to the immediate reaction that what they must be doing is somehow odd or unnormal. When in reality, why do we care so much? If we were truly satisfied and we were truly living freely and we were so content with our lives, why would we even care to bat an eye? It's the same eye that goes to others and portrays judgment on them. It's that same sort of wandering eye that is looking around to see if other people are judging us. It's the same mechanism at play. If we're so used to sort of, I guess, judging ourselves, it's because we're doing the same thing we do to other people, and we don't realize that the people who we may be finding ourselves judging, they're probably more free, emotionally free than us. And the way for us to be emotionally free is actually taking a page out of their handbook. And this is a really good lesson, and it's almost like a nice humbling practice where, even if someone is dressed in a way you wouldn't want to dress, you can still take a page out of their book by going out of your comfort zone and learning to express yourself in a way where you don't really care what other people think. I think every time we sort of like find our mind, I guess, drifting towards a judgment, so we see someone and we sort of, that judgment sort of pops into our mind, we should take notice of that and say, actually, I'm just not going to judge. I'm not going to pay them any mind. I'm not going to pay them any attention. Because why would we? Why do we care? Who cares? I'm a big proponent in using our energy and our attention for things that are valuable, and judging other people just isn't valuable. It just isn't. And it's one of those things where if we just take notice of it in our mind, and every time we jump to sort of judge someone mentally, we take a step back and we say, I'm actually not going to participate in that thought process. Then we can actually stop the judgment of other people. And then when we begin that practice of stop judging other people, we're going to see naturally we almost start to feel a bit more emotionally free within ourselves too, because the mind is just letting go of judgment as an energy and as a mental processing as a whole. So I would say the two go hand in hand. And if you already have an established mindfulness practice where you're observing your thoughts, this is a good addition because you can observe your judgments as well. And I don't necessarily think we need to ask ourselves, why are we judging them? Because it's usually pretty simple, right? I mean, someone's doing something a little bit out of the quote unquote norm. And so our brain sees them as sort of fitting outside of the normal patterns of what we see in our everyday life. But if we want to start to expect new things and new experiences in our life, and we want to stay open and most of all be emotionally free, we need to just let those sort of surprising acts of people and sort of surprising portrayals of people just be there. because you have an open mind. You don't need to judge them. So when that judgment comes into your mind of another or yourself, just watch it pass. And again, it's choosing which thought processes to act on. It's the same thing as an anxious thought, a negative thought, anything else. What are we choosing to act on and what are we choosing to participate in when it comes to our sort of mental processing state? Good question.
I'm on day 56 of your guided journal, and it's genuinely changed my life. But I also have ADHD. It's hard for me to sit still. I was wondering if you have any like tips or tricks for people with ADHD learning to practice meditation.
First off, I'm so glad you're enjoying the book. And day 56, you're almost done, so congratulations. I don't know too much of the nuances of ADHD, but I'm going to sort of cut to the sort of root of the question. And I'm going to assume that with ADHD being still, like you said, makes it more difficult. But I still don't know if that sort of contradicts the fact that our brain can become adjusted to stillness when we sort of sit and allow the difficulties and the discomfort feelings in our body to just be there. If we can sort of practice not giving into that impulse and sort of not walking away from sitting in meditation, and no matter how much, no matter how uncomfortable it is, if you add 30 seconds, if you add a minute every single day, I have a hard time believing that maybe even with ADHD, and I'm not going to make any certainties, but my thought process is even with ADHD, I don't think that would stop the mind from sort of acting in a neuroplastic way and strengthening itself to be able to still sit still for long periods of time. So I think if you sit still and you meditate every day and you add 30 seconds every single day, I think that you will benefit from it. I don't think you should jump straight to 20 or 30-minute meditations if you've never meditated. Start with 1 minute, then a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and gradually make your way up. And you'll see, even if you make your way up and those discomforts and that sort of raging impulse to move is still present, I think that's your practice right there, is the discomfort, the wanting to move away. And I think even with ADHD, we can sort of train our minds to exist in that sort of way. Maybe you will be slightly more challenged in your practice, but I think that gives more power to you. And if anything, once you add 30 seconds and you start training your mind to be still and training yourself and your body to be still, I think you'll feel even more empowered as a result of you doing that. So the big thing is add a little bit of time every single day. And number two, really don't give into that wanting to walk away. That is your practice. That is your meditation. And actually, if what you're struggling with is a mix of the thoughts and the bodily wanting to walk away, I would actually solve the bodily wanting to walk away first. So even if your thoughts are sort of running a little bit rampant and they're sort of a little bit crazy, there's a lot going on up there. I would actually focus on just stilling the body first, because you need to be able to hold the body still to be able to observe your thoughts, because the chances are right now you're thinking about how and when your body is going to start sort of sending the signals to move. And that doesn't allow necessarily the opportunity to observe and detach from thoughts, because you're so focused on your body and you knowing that sooner or later your body's going to sort of send those intense signals to you to move and walk and run, whatever it may be. So I think first, just practice bodily stillness, because it sounds like that's what you want, and you want to sort of combat those sort of urges to move when you want to stay still. And I think we can. And even with ADHD, I'm almost certainly confident that that will not hinder the neuroplastic process from unfolding. Hopefully that helps. And thank you for buying the book and thank you for participating in it. I hope you enjoy it. Let's check out the next question.
Hi, Kinzer. My question is if you still go through phases of being aware of your thoughts and then somehow slowly starting to be influenced by them again, because I feel like that's what I experience. I have moments of being completely detached from them and then slowly becoming more attached to them, and I'm wondering if you experience that as well.
Good question, first off. And the short answer is yes. I think the reason why I can communicate well with you guys and why you guys maybe like listening to me and reading my writing is because, yeah, I'm constantly, I wouldn't say struggling, but I'm constantly sort of maneuvering that same process that you guys are. And that is, you know, even when the thoughts aren't negative, it can become very easy to attach to them because we feel so aligned and it feels so sort of natural to just, I don't know, give in to that inner voice and use it as an inner monologue to sort of narrate our life. And I think, it depends on which way you're looking at it because the people and, all types of people who are struggling with negative thoughts, they need relief ASAP as soon as possible. So they will go about it and they will detach from all thoughts to move as close to a quiet mind as they can. But someone who doesn't necessarily struggle with negative thoughts, I don't know how much of a problem it really is. And then there's sort of the third tangent where someone is just looking for a sort of spiritual sense and I guess an awakening in that sort of way. I guess what I'm saying is there becomes a sort of different type of desperation when someone is needing to break free of thoughts because it is affecting their everyday life. And there's a different point when we're sort of just looking to detach from thoughts even further to sort of keep existing in a emotionally free state. We're keep trying to see how far can we sort of thread that needle, how much more can we feel free, and that's a good place to come from. But I think there comes a certain point when we need to have that profound foundation, which is you can't believe your thoughts. So I think we're talking about attachment and detachment right now. But if you have the core belief, which I do deep within me, I understand that I don't need to believe my thoughts. Thoughts are a product of neurological biochemistry. You know, they're like brain farts, they're like burps. I say it all the time. So there's nothing to attach to, but do I still find myself engaging with them? Of course. When I'm on a run or I'm taking a shower, whatever it may be, I will find myself sort of talking to myself, as many of us do. And I wouldn't say I'm always in a rush to snap out of it. What it really comes from is a lot of times after I'm done, or if it goes on for too long, I'll realize, okay, this isn't really helpful, and I'll just stop. But that's very different from being caught in a thought loop because it's been a little bit of an extended time since I've sort of needed to desperately break free from thoughts. And when you're at that point, yes, you need a sort of radical detachment while you understand and sort of implement the core belief that thoughts are not of any inherent value. But once you have that understanding, which it kind of sounds like you do, that thoughts are not anything to be sort of argued with or to conversate with, if they're not affecting your life, I would say just keep pulling yourself back out of it. And if that's the game you want to play, then that's the game you want to play. And that's sort of the game of a clear mind and, how far do you want to take it? I think I've reached a point where my thoughts don't bother me. They're there and they oftentimes don't affect my peace, oftentimes. But of course, I have those same sort of battles, and there will come times when I am face to face with thoughts or with a situation that sort of trigger anxiety or feeling overwhelmed, and you need to come back into that practice and not allow those thoughts to sort of suffocate you and convince you into making choices and decisions you don't want to make. So I think that's the big thing, right? When you find yourself falling in and out of an attachment with thought, I think the most important part is it deterring your life in any way? And if so, is it also robbing you of your peace and your happiness? Because thoughts themselves are not inherently harmful. It's always our relationship with thoughts. So if you're worried about engaging with thoughts as a means of sort of lower spiritual, I guess, perspective, it depends on how you want to look at it. I think the main thing is, are thoughts disrupting our peace? Are they affecting our lives in a negative way? So if the answer is yes, then we need to continue to bring ourselves out of those thought loops again and again and again. So you see a thought, you come back to the present moment, you see a thought, come back, and it's that same sort of process over and over again. And there's really only one, practice, and that's the practice. It's getting lost in thoughts and bringing yourself back to the present moment. So if you want to do it out of desperation, then yes, you need to hammer that practice down again and again and again, and also continue to feed yourself the idea that beliefs do not have inherent value and that you as a being are not thoughts. However long it takes to realize that, however many times you need to practice the getting lost and grounding yourself back in the present moment, that's however many times it will take. But if they're not affecting your life negatively, I would actually sort of reflect and mirror the fact that you may be now hanging on to the fact that thoughts are a bad sign, that for some reason, if you have thoughts, that you are somehow suffering, even if you don't feel it emotionally. And if that's the case, I would just give breathing room to the whole practice as a whole. Don't get too caught up to the point where you're hyper analyzing and constantly worried about if you're having thoughts or not. I would be more concerned with, are the thoughts making your choices for you, and are they resulting in emotions that are triggering you to the point where now your decisions are being made from a place and mental state that you don't want to be in? Good question.
Hi, Kinzer. I was wondering what are good exercises to become mentally stronger? Can this be meditation, breath work? And what do you recommend from how many times you should do it daily, weekly, or whatsoever? Or are there some activities that you can incorporate in your daily life? Thanks.
I haven't gotten too deep into breath work, but I'm definitely interested in it. I definitely want to try it, and maybe I'll, give it a whirl and sort of give you my thoughts and my feedback on it. But in terms of mental practices, I mean, if we're talking aside from the obvious meditation, I would say the greatest mental challenge itself is living life in a way where you feel satisfied, fulfilled, and you are enjoying your life. I think life itself is the greatest mental practice. I think it's very easy to sort of, no, it's not easy. Sorry, let me reframe this. It's not easy to sit in your room and meditate, but there will come a point where sitting in your room and journaling and doing these mental practices can be abused and can be a sort of scapegoat for progress, when in reality, real progress is seen through reality itself. I think a lot of times we can get caught up in the mental aspect of it all, and we don't realize that, our actions, our choices, our decisions, and our experiences in life are the greatest teacher. So I would urge you to, if you have a purpose you want to fulfill, if there's something you want to do, I would actually see what's holding you back from doing those things. And that is a great mental practice. Because in living reality and in experiencing life, there will be plenty of mental challenges that come and seek you. So I don't know if we need to seek mental practices for future events that have not yet happened, but rather live life in a way where we're embodying presence and our sort of philosophy in such a deep way where we can't help but sort of tackle and conquer these mental challenges along the way. So I would say the greatest mental practice is living without interruption. Um, and, I think a great mental practice is, of course, coming back to the present moment, like I said, and that's the main sort of focus of meditation. And if there's ever going to be one thing that I recommend, it's making your life a meditation rather than obsessing too much over separating the two. Because in life, that's where the real triggers are. Once we overcome thought triggers, there's going to be triggers in reality that trigger us emotionally, that force us to leave our comfort zone, that force us to face our fears. And those are the greatest mental challenges. And that's the greatest mental practice because that's real. All that other stuff, it's usually been mental, unnecessary suffering. But now when we're actually challenged in reality, we're actually forced to participate. And when there's a participation in life, life reacts back to us. And in turn, our brain observes our actions in response to living life. Our brain doesn't really learn from sort of imagined scenarios and building, I guess, mental strength and mental fortitude through our own, I guess, imagination and our own design. What really happens is our brain learns as a result of our actions. And when we overcome things that we are scared to do, when we face our fears, when we leave our comfort zone, when we change ourselves in a way where we're now more satisfied with our life rather than living in avoidance and living in comfort, the brain will actually start to change and reformulate itself and strengthen itself much, much quicker. You don't become a better swimmer by, I guess, rehearsing the methods of swimming and watching people swim. Those things help, but you only really get to be a good swimmer when you are in the water and you're swimming. And the same applies with living life, and the same applies with your mindset when you're engaging with reality itself. Great question.
Hey Kinzer, so my question is that how to reach at the point where my body is at peace, doesn't need anything outside of me, and is completely okay all the time. My nervous system should be very calm.
So, yeah, I went through a point in my life where I tried to, I guess you can say, reach enlightenment. And my opinion on that is it grew quite inconvenient. And in my search for enlightenment, I found so much avoidance. And I found a lot of lies that were reflected back to me in what I actually wanted out of life. And, I think when you're talking about, I want to have a regulated nervous system all the time, number one, I think that takes time to build. I think we need to sort of condition ourselves and train our body to regulate itself in a growing degree of environments and various, I guess, settings. So what I would recommend actually is to not start with the idea that you need to be sort of at peace and have a regulated nervous system all of the time, but rather, can you have a regulated nervous system and be at peace in just sort of one level up? Sort of that uncomfortable thing that comes to your mind. If there's an uncomfortable situation or a sort of setting that makes you anxious, can we train ourselves to be regulated and at peace in that environment? I don't think we need to tackle our entire life and sort of try to create a energy that is so powerful just yet. I think we can actually make our way towards that. And I think trying to rush the entire process and trying to sort of, I guess, exist in enlightenment in such a quick state, it can be difficult because there's a lot of things going on. I mean, there's psychological conditioning since we were young that needs a bit of time to, I guess, decondition. And there's also our bodies that sort of need to be taught to not live in fight or flight, and that need to be taught that just because we receive anxious or, nerve-wracking thoughts or feelings, that doesn't necessarily mean we're in danger. It just means we're experiencing a bit of discomfort and that we're okay and we're safe and we are good to move through this particular path. So I think when it comes to, regulated nervous system and being at peace all the time, I don't know if we should aim our sights on that just yet. I think we should aim our sights at having a regulated nervous system and being at peace in one environment and then another and then another and then another, and see how does life, I guess, present the cards to us. And again, how are we allowing ourselves to get in the way of what we really want out of life? So if the key here is to have a regulated nervous system and be at peace in a sort of chaotic social setting, then I think we should maybe seek these chaotic social settings only if that's what we want. And it depends how far you want to take it. To the person who wants to be emotionally free really bad and they want to see how far they can take it, they will actually seek these uncomfortable environments and seek to have a regulated nervous system and be at peace in these environments because they know that this is sort of a training ground for them. And the more they do it, they train their mind to be more at peace and they train their nervous system to be more regulated. So I guess repetitions are the way to do it. And if you want to climb that ladder to being regulated and being at peace all the time, then I guess I would just say take it one event at a time and at the speed in which you wish. You could be as intense about it as you would like.
What's your perspective on getting over a friend or like a boyfriend, a family member doing you really wrong, like treating you in a way you didn't deserve or just doing something unimaginable to you? And like, obviously, I know like people, like, stuff happens for a reason. People act how they act. You can't control them. And yes, I know like the let them theory, but like the hurt and the pain that comes with letting them, like, how do you deal with that?
Okay, so there's two parts of this question that I want to answer deeply, and that is number one, you can forgive the person without forgiving their actions, right? So humans are flawed. We make bad decisions, we do bad things, we make bad choices. So it's not about forgiving the person and their actions as a whole, but it's about forgiving the person for being in the mental state and for existing in the state of being in which they can do such a thing to you. You know, we're forgiving the person for being flawed. We're forgiving the person for choosing wrong and doing wrong, right? Because they did not know any better from a conscious standpoint. But we do not have to forgive their actions. We do not have to jump back into a relationship with a person. We don't have to continue talking to a person. And we don't have to sort of act like they are forgiven as a whole, including their actions. We are forgiving them for being negligent. We are forgiving them for not knowing any better. You know, in a way, we're sort of treating them as giving them the benefit of the doubt. And even if what they did was really bad, again, it's not about forgiving their actions. It's about forgiving them for being in the state of being where they can do such a thing. And that brings me to the second point in which you mentioned. And that's what a lot of sort of, I guess, influencers and other people forget to mention is that, yeah, those feelings of hurting and darkness and sadness and heartbreak, all those things still exist. And we could treat those as emotions, right? So we forgave the person for being negligent and for not knowing any better. We forgive them. We're not rushing back into their arms. We're not going to say, oh yeah, they're an amazing person. They just did a bad thing. We don't even need to say any of that. You know, we're forgiving the person for not knowing any better. And now we're dealing with the raw emotions of the matter, right? And that brings us into feeling it deeply, feeling that hurt deeply and allowing it to exist. Because probably what's happening right now is you're tying those emotions to that person. So there's a little part of you that almost wants not revenge, maybe so, but probably not revenge, but you want some sort of closure from them. But that's probably not going to happen. And even if it did happen, I mean, we would only be sort of prolonging this lesson until a later time. You know, we're forgiving the person, but we're not granting them the sort of privilege of their actions being acceptable. You know, if they apologize and if what they did was really wrong, you don't even necessarily need to accept the apology. You just have to not, I guess, rebel in a way where you're all of a sudden giving life to all these dark emotions that are now controlling your life. So we deal with the emotions like we deal with a lot of other heavy emotions. We sit with them deeply. We allow them the space to exist. We breathe through them very slowly. And we exist in a place where we're dealing with the emotions by themselves. So when you feel an emotion and your thought triggers back to that person, say the person no longer has anything to do with this. I'm now focusing strictly on how I feel. How does it feel in my body? That's what you should be focusing on. Because through that, we can learn to create space for that emotion. And when that emotion is given space, it is given room to sort of move on, like a cloud passing in the sky. So we need to focus on the raw emotion of the matter. Where do you feel it in your body? What does it make you want to do? And detach the person from the entire experience. You know, you mentioned the let them theory, and the part of it rings true, but you need to remember the raw emotional matter of the situation. I think that's sort of the missing link that you're looking for, is that you don't have to forgive their actions. We can both sit at a table and with our sort of subjective morality, we can say, oh yeah, that was a bad thing to do, right? We don't need to be sort of sitting on our higher moral chair to say that. We can both agree that what they did was bad, but that doesn't necessarily excuse you from being happy in your life and from letting these emotions to just continue to make you miserable, and we just continue to point blame at that person. You know, if all that's left is the emotional damage, then we need to deal with the raw emotions themselves, and we need to feel them, we need to allow them, and we need to move through them. Instead of constantly thinking about the person, we need to aim our focus on what is going on inside of us, what are we feeling inside of our body, and how can we create space for these feelings to exist and continuously sort of not draw attention to the person themselves or their actions, because that's been dealt with already. We've already acknowledged that we're forgiving the persons, or that we're forgiving the person and we're forgetting the actions. And we're now dealing with what's left, and that is the emotional damage. And if all that's left is the emotional damage, then we could treat it, psychologically, and that is making room, moving through it, and not feeding it, breathing through it and giving it the proper space to exist and pass. Hopefully that helps. There's a bit more nuance to it, but I think that's the sort of general way we can start to, get that person out of our mind, is not focus on forgiving them from a sort of subjective moral standpoint, but forgiving them because, that's kind of the only reasonable thing to do for us to move on. And, what else are we going to do? Are we going to just, sit with that feeling and sort of that judgment forever? And of course not. We need to move on. And for us to move on, we need to deal with the emotions and create space for them to also move on. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. For those of you listening on Spotify, thank you for tuning in. For those of you watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. You guys can always buy my books at shop-kinzer.com or on Amazon. And other than that, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Don't hesitate to reach out to me with people you want to see on here. And I have a couple guests lined up for the next couple weeks. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And I can't wait to keep growing with you guys. And I hope you guys enjoy these episodes. Peace.